Dr. Campbell told this. He said early in his career he went to see a patient who was coming out of anesthesia. And just as he walked into the room and walked up to this patient was starting to come out of it. In the distance, they heard church bells chiming. And the woman kind of looked up and said, "I must be in heaven." And then she saw Dr. Campbell and she said, "No, I can't be. There's Dr. Campbell." I don't know who was the most disappointed. But the fact is, and this is the way we should be, I do not want to disappoint God. Do you? I do not want to hang my head in shame when I stand before God. And every one of us are going to stand before God in judgment someday. Yes, even Christians, the Bible tells us. Those who are not Christians are going to stand before God, and God's going to say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Those who are Christians are going to stand before God and give an account of our lives. I don't want to have to stand before God and God say, "Why did you do this? How come you were such a disappointment to me?" I don't want to do that, do you? I want to live a life that's pleasing to God. And that's the kind of life we all should live. Now, the second side of this coin is the negative side. And that is that we are to stay away from unfruitful works. Stay away from doing things that are unfruitful. Now, we want to know what's pleasing to God, but I think most of us already know things that are not pleasing to God, don't we? You know what you should not be doing. You know what's wrong, what you ought to stay away from. These, he says, are the unfruitful works, unfruitful things and works of darkness. Now, works of darkness, that's just the things of the devil. That's the things of sin. And he makes it very clear that those are wrong. But what about those unfruitful works? Things that just don't help you to grow. Things that just may not actually be sin in themselves, but at the same time, they're not really good. Stay away from them. Things that are sin, things that lead to sin, and things that simply are not in our best interests. Stay away from them. Avoid those things. For some reason, though, there are a lot of people in this world that seem to have the idea they want to see how far they can go. Instead of staying away from them and stepping back from them, they want to get as close as they can. They want to be right there, just as long as they don't cross that imaginary line somewhere. That's the opposite direction of pleasing God. I've said before that we often ask the wrong questions. And when we're thinking about doing something, about something that may be tempting or something that someone's trying to get us to do, we ask the wrong questions. We say, "How far can I go? Can I do this?" When the real question as Christians we ought to be asking is the question of, should I do this? Is this pleasing to God? And if we ask that question, we'll get the answer that we need to know. Instead, these verses that we just read tell us that we shouldn't be flirting with sin. Instead of that, we should be exposing it for what it is. Speak up. We live in a time when sinful, wicked behavior is being upheld as the normal and beautiful and great thing. We need to be standing up and say, "No, this is sin. This is wrong." Now, I'm not saying we ought to go out and beat people over the head. We still have to love people. We hate the sin and love the people. And for some reason, the world can't understand that. They think, well, if you don't like what I'm doing, then you must hate me. That's not true. God doesn't like what they're doing, but yet He still loves them enough to send His Son, Jesus, to die on the cross to pay for their sin so they can be forgiven, so they can go to heaven. Sin is wrong. It needs to be exposed. We should not try to justify sin or excuse sin. We should expose sin for what it is, an abomination to the Lord. Sin is an offense, rebellion against God, no matter who it is or what it is or what that sin might be. It is an abomination to God, and it is simply rebelling against Him. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Before I go on, let me say a little something about this verse. I have heard this verse used to preach by some people, and they would say, oh, people in heaven are looking down on us. They're witnessing. No, that's not what it says. You have to look at things in context. The context of this is the great men and women of God in the chapter before that who were faithful to God. And the context determines what this verse means. And what this verse means is that all of these people, the great men and women of God who did great things that were mentioned in chapter 11, and some who of the world the Bible says was not worthy. All people are witnesses, which is a witness gives a testimony. They are a testimony to the fact that you can live a Christian life and you can serve God to the end. And so what he's saying, because of all of these people back here have proved that a person can live a godly life, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so close, and run with endurance the race that is set before us. That's what he's saying. We can do it. We can live that life that would not be a disappointment to God. Mark chapter 4, verse 19 says, "But the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it is brotherly affection and affection with love. For if these qualities are yours, they keep you from being effective or unfruitful in the